Milo's in the house. He's almost always in the house, except when we go out running. Oh, Milo, go in the backyard, run around. Milo is here with me, as always. That's my faithful companion. Tonight we're going to talk about injector placement and airflow, all kinds of cool stuff. But actually, before I get to that, I want people, if you're coming here to watch stuff, you should go take a look at I saw a post on Sloppy Mechanics, and I don't remember if it was on, probably was Facebook. You need to take a look at, if you haven't, take a look at the homemade centrifugal supercharger that the guy made. I talked a little bit about this morning on the earlier live feed. We were talking about it looks like he took some kind of old turbo and then put a drive pulley on the shaft, on the common shaft, took off the turbine housing and the turbine wheel, and then put a drive pulley on it, and then is going to drive that with the motor. It's an interesting concept. We could talk about that a little bit, because that's essentially what a centrifugal supercharger is. And we can talk a little bit about the problems with that. First of all, whoever you are, I'm not that familiar with all of the people there. It's a big place, and there's a lot of people there, and they do a lot of cool stuff. Obviously, that's Matt's deal, and he's done lots of stuff and helping lots of people for a long time, which is very, very cool. And I like that people do weird stuff like that. And I love the attitude that, like, hey, let's see if it works. I think that one's is kind of going to have trouble, but it still will be cool. I think that there might be some oiling issues, but what there's definitely going to be is impeller RPM issues, because if we take a look at the impeller speed of a turbo, it can easily be 6 digits. It can easily be 100,000 or more. I don't remember what that particular turbo was, but they're all going to have a range that they run in. They're going to have a maximum RPM, and they're going to have ranges down below that. And they can make boosts at a lot of different RPM ranges. So you can have a pretty broad range where it's still working. The problem is that, as we've seen, and I've showed in the videos that I've done, with if you liken this to a centrifugal supercharger, which it kind of is as a homemade deal, again, just 17 different kinds of awesome. If you liken it to that and you see what the centrifugal supercharger does, you know that at low speeds, it doesn't make very much boost, and it doesn't make very much boost until very higher engine speeds. Because what it needs is that sort of impeller design and size, unlike a positive displacement supercharger, which is spinning very big rotors, which grab a lot of air at one time in one revolution. The centrifugal supercharger grabs a smaller amount of air, and so it has to have lots of revolutions. Pretty simple explanation. But here's the problem. On a centrifugal supercharger, it usually has an internal step ratio. So we know that the crank pulley is driving some kind of blower pulley. So we have some sort of ratio there. Let's say that the crank pulley is 6 inches in diameter and the blower pulley is 3 inches in diameter. That's 2 to 1. So if you multiplied that by, let's say, 6,000 RPM, obviously we know we can run more engine speed than that, but about 6,000 RPM at a 2 to 1, we've got 12,000 RPM impeller speed, right? For a centrifugal supercharger, that's not nearly enough. So you're probably asking yourself, hey, Richard, well, how do guys get lots of impeller speed from these centrifugal blowers to make them work? Well, they have an internal step ratio. So they have an internal gear, essentially they have another big crank pulley and a small blower pulley inside the blower itself, inside the casing. That's why you have to have, if it's self-contained, it has its own oil reservoir to lubricate. It's a gear drive inside there, basically. Some of them were planetary drives and stuff, but typically they're gear drives. And so they have oil fed, either pressurized oil fed, like we've seen on a lot of these, and then they have a drain going back down to the tank. Some of them have an oil, it's self-contained, so it has a fixed amount of oil in it, and it just spins around and grabs the oil. And, just if you've ever seen the Lucas Oil, the gear oil displays that they have it like almost all the super shops and obviously stuff later than that, well into the 2000s, well past Y2K. But you can see it just grabs oil and grabs it and it climbs up all the gears. So that works very, very well. But the internal step on these things might be 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 to 1. It depends on what they're trying to accomplish. But so now if it's 3 to 1, now our 12,000 becomes 36,000. But But if it's more than that, which it could be 3.5 or 4, again, it depends. But at 4 to 1, it becomes 12,000. And as we go up in blower speed or go up in engine speed, it gets multiplied even more. So now we're talking about making them 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever, 1,000 RPM. And then the size of the supercharger is going to dictate also where the thing is efficient, what they did to the impeller design, all that stuff. The problem with a turbo is especially a smaller turbo, it's designed to be 100,000, and spinning it with the blower. I mean, spinning it with just the engine speed, and then the gear multiplication of whatever you do to a crank pulley and a blower pulley. I don't know how much ratio you're going to get on that, but it's not going to be 10 to 1 or 20 to 1. It's just not going to be that. It's going to be very, very hard to make that happen. One, it's hard to get that big of a crank pulley and that small of a blower pulley. It's hard physically to get that big of a crank pulley because it's going to hit and interfere with other things. And then to get that small of a blower pulley, you run into belt slippage problems. How do you get the belt wrap to work on a pulley that's, it's like 8 dimes welded together? The guy's got to be a really good welder to make that happen, but you get the idea. It's just basically a little bit bigger than the shaft is. So that's the problem with it. But again, I don't care about that, and we can logic this thing to death, but that sort of thing does not take away the awesomeness of it. I mean, like I said, I salute people that try this kind of stuff, and it's fantastic. And now he just needs to have 2 of them, right? Because one's not enough, so you need to have 2 or multiples of them. But that's very, very awesome. The thumbnail that I have up, and I'm gonna show this to you too. So we got some people here, some peeps. So I'll bring the camera around, so hopefully you'll be able to see that. So hopefully you guys can see that, right? You can see all that stuff. So what we have is an air horn, a full radius air horn. We have that's an RC injector. That looks like a 370 or something. This is run on the Del Sol. You can see I have a fuel rail here for the injector. I have a slider over here that you can see a little bit of. And what that did is that's another tube. And so we could move this fuel rail basically in and out and position the injector wherever we want it. So we could make the injector kind of do what we want. And it's already a remote injector anyway. So, it's up in the air horn, which is better for power production, as we saw, because I picked up a lot of power when we moved it there, as opposed to it being, and this one was never even down by the head port. This one was midway up the runner, because it's a better position to be midway up the runner, but it's actually a much better position to be all the way up the runner. So that works out pretty well. So we definitely picked up power, but my question goes deeper than that. In looking at that photo, so we have the injector, centered and kind of ostensibly taking up a bunch of the airflow. Does it do that? Does that hurt the airflow of that port? Does that hurt the total airflow of that port, positioning the injector there? So that's my question. I was very, very surprised where the airflow, because we mapped it. So I was very, very surprised where the airflow was on this radius air horn. So it's kind of cool. So good. Again, good testing. Hey, you know what I'm going to do? And this is how this stuff goes. And that's why I brought up this blower thing, which is a fairly cool idea. But you're just sitting around, like I was at lunch with my buddy Jason, and I'm like, you know what? We need to move I want to move the injector like out in front of the air hat. He's like, oh, okay, well, that shouldn't be too hard. To just, the rail should already work, because it has the little clips that hold the injector in place. So a lot of times fuel rails will be such that you have to secure the fuel rail down, and that's what stops the pressure from pushing the injector out, because it can't do that if it has a mounting bracket on the rail that holds the rail down, and it stops the injector from going in either direction. Basically, they have stops on both sides of it, and so the pressure would want to push it out, and we've seen that happen before when it's not lined up perfectly, and it can't push it out because in the top of that injector where it goes into the rail, there's a little groove. A lot of factory, particularly GM stuff, they have a little clip that slides into that groove and secures the injector to the rail, so it can't come away from the rail. So that way, when it goes as one assembly, we just sit it out there. I'm like, okay, well, that'll be good. I said, what I want to do though is rather than put it like in one spot, why don't I make it so I can change that? I mean, I'm already moving it. I'm already going from where it would be at the cylinder head to where it would be midway up the runner to outside of the runner. But now, what happens? What happens if it's really far away? I kind of want to see what I wanted to see was how jacked up the spray pattern was going to be if the angle of dispersion on the like the cone on the injector went past the, like we moved it back far enough, it went past the radiused air horn. So like, so it wasn't, so all the fuel wasn't getting in there. And so it's, it got to a point where it got really, really ugly. It didn't want to idle and stuff. And and it wouldn't take power either. It started making a bunch less power because the fuel was not getting in there. So there was kind of an ideal position for that. And even still, I don't think drivability would be that great with this injector position. I mean, I think it would start up and you could drive it around, but I don't know that it would be the thing that I would want it to. It wouldn't be what I wanted to, but it does make good power, which is why when they used to do this stuff, and maybe they still do in Formula One and other forms of professional racing, that they did a secondary, they did stage injection, which we've done on the, Tom did on the Bonneville car that we ran, where you have another injector that's down near the port. You got your drivability injector for your yellow flag stuff. Because the last thing you want is you wouldn't ever want the motor, loading up or anything, or plug fouling or that kind of thing, because you have your super power injector setup going. So that was cool. But like I said, I was surprised about the airflow. And so the question for tonight will be, can you hurt the airflow of the port with the injector location? Is it possible to put the injector in the way and just basically hurt the airflow? Because in this photo that I showed you guys, if you saw that and it decreased the airflow of that port, why do we pick up power? and really the question that's on the intro for this is can you do both? Can we hurt the airflow of the port, and can we help the power? Can we do both of those things at the same time? I think the answer is probably yes to that, because you could have, a bigger percentage of the gain and then a smaller percentage of the loss. You could have some sort of sliding scale there, which is kind of cool. The other thing I wanted to point out is I'm excited. My buddy Matt Mullen finally got it after I don't know how many years. I think he has a 347, so he got it running in his Mustang, and I think that might be the old 8,000 RPM small block Ford. So we'll have to see how. I don't know if it still has that cam in it or not. I don't think that it does. I think I remember seeing that cam, so I think it has a milder camshaft in it, but it will be interesting to see. He finally got. Is it a Mustang? It might be a Mustang or a Granada or something. Is it some sort of Fox chassis deal? So let's see what you guys got going on. Squirrel. Squirrelage. Yo mama. Nice. Turbo 14. James, you're here for the beginning. Imagine a transmission for a centrifugal supercharger. The guys have it. The guys at ProCharger have a CVT basically, so it keeps the thing at the desired RPM. So it's always spinning a lot. So it would make more boost down low than a typical centrifugal supercharger, and that would kind of be cool. The problem is, and we go over this a lot when people mention, because whenever you talk to the centrifugal superchargers guys, and I'm an OG one. I had the very first Vortec on my Mustang, so I know what centrifugal superchargers are, and I've been a fan of them forever. And even before that, even the old Paxton McCullough stuff, having blowers on there, it's always good. And whenever you have a boosted something, it's better than a non-boosted something. But now I forgot where I was going. Oh, the RPM range. So on the whenever you talk to the centrifugal supercharger guys and you talk to them about the boost curves, hey, look, this one has a rising boost curve. It doesn't make very much boost down here. It makes peak boost basically at peak RPM, whatever you're revving it to. And you show them, hey, this kind of blower does a lot better down low or whatever, and the turbo makes more power and then drive losses. You explain all of that though. Well, immediately they and I don't understand this when they're talking to me because it's not like I don't understand centrifugal superchargers, but they jump right into, well, yeah, but if you speed the blower up and then you put a wastegate on it or a blow off valve or whatever, so that you can limit the boost at the top. I'm like, yeah, that's been done years and years ago. So the guys at Real Time Racing, Petey Cunningham, used to do that on the NSX. They allowed him to have a Vortec because everybody else was making 1,000,000 horsepower with the cars, the Corvettes and things that they were running. And his NSX, and NSX is a really good car. It handles great. It does lots of good things. It just doesn't have nearly enough power compared to this other stuff. So they allowed him to have a supercharger, and that's what he did. They said, okay, but you can only run 10 pounds of boost. And he's like, okay, well, when you race this thing around, unless you keep this thing wicked up, it's not making that maximum boost. So that's what they did. They wicked it up and then cut it at 10 pounds, and then they could have a little bit more of a usable RPM range. When you talk to the centrifugal guys, they're presenting it as we've cured the problem with a centrifugal blower, and you haven't. Because the thing is, if you look at the boost curve of a centrifugal blower, regardless of what the pulley ratio is, if you look at that, it's still really low down low because you have to have all this multiplier effect to happen. And you just don't get that until you get higher engine speeds. So even if you pulley the heck out of it, you're never going to get, like, if you run this thing from 2,000 RPM to 6,500 RPM, there's no amount of pulley that you can put in there to have it make the boost that it's making at 6,500 RPM at 2,000 RPM. It cannot have a flat boost curve. That's not going to happen. What you can do is you can change the rate of acceleration basically of the curve and have it hit 10 pounds earlier and then carry 10 pounds if you wastegate it or blow off valve it. But it's just never going to do what these other blowers do. It will be better, and that's good. But the thing is, it's not what these other things are. And that's just one of my points of contention. Let's see. Can you hurt the airflow of the port with injector? 85% are saying yes. Oh, and then the transmission, the guys have a CVT so that it can be spun up a lot. But again, even with that, you still the amount that you can spin it up is still relative to engine speed. What do you think about torque storms or old power dynes? The torque storm is now different than the power dyne was, obviously, and I've run those a lot. And every time we've run it, it's worked pretty well. But it's just not. It's not. It's sized the way that it's sized for a given amount of power. It's just not what some of these bigger blowers are. Rottweiler, how about reverse flow? What do you mean reverse flow? You mean reversion, or you mean reflected waves seen on 4, 5, 6 cylinders that sometimes have serious reverse flow into the intake manifold? Every motor has that. It's called the reflected wave, and that's how they make power. You have reflected waves that go out from the intake valve out to the common plenum, and then back from the common plenum, because they go out as a negative pressure wave and they come back as a positive pressure wave. And we saw a lot of that, and we've seen it many times, but we saw a lot of that on this particular application because during different engine speeds, you have what's called fuel standoff. So you could see the fuel hovering around the top of the radius entry. You could see it down in the port because you could, while this thing is making runs on the chassis down, you could look in there and see it. But you can actually see the fuel change during RPM. You could see a big fuel a big fuel cloud, let's say, come up and go down and come up and go down, and it's really kind of cool. But every motor has that, and you want that to be the case. Because what happens is it goes out as a negative pressure wave, comes back as a positive pressure wave, and if you get it to arrive at the right time, you have a supercharging effect that improves power. That's why we don't just run like an open head and not have any intake runner length, because the intake runner length adds power by doing that. It doesn't do that by improving the flow, although it might as a tapered entry or something. But that effect would be very minimum compared to what these reflected waves are doing. Yeah, Chris, it's not designed for drivability. My experience on a flow bench showed a piece of tubing within 4 inches of the inlet is a measurable restriction. That's interesting because I've put my finger in the center of that and we're not showing what you're talking about. Let's see. Let's see here. Man, I don't know what happened. Did I get way down here from? Let's see. The way to run the injectors way up, you'll need a set of injectors by the throttle blades. These were well above the throttle blades. It's Friday. I'm guessing a lot of folks are out having fun or drinking. The live isn't packed tonight. I'm at the house. Nice. Tonight's not Friday, though, is it? Is it Thursday? I don't even know. Did you post results of the M90 and the 4.8? That video has been up for a long time. I'm not a TIG welder. Can I use non-aluminum tubes, MIG welded for the cold side? Yeah, you can use steel. It's just heavier. Alan getting paid to watch. I like that. You're a pro. How about hooking a router on the back side of the turbo, cold side, and use an inverter to power it? They have electric turbos already, but it's not again, and electric superchargers. The problem is that it takes a lot to spin it. I mean, it's a big power change to make it work. It's a lot of power draw. Todd, what's up? Did some work on the tune today. 85 lambda, 22 degrees at 6,500. Can't do full pull, not enough traction. Well, that's a good problem to have, right? Is there any downside to higher rocker ratios on a small block Chevy? Any reason to run 1.7s on the intake and 1.6 on the exhaust when you could run 1.7s on both? No, I've never understood. I mean, we've tested doing one and then the other, and whether or not it does anything, it's going to be dependent on the exact combination that you're testing it on. It's not universal for small block Chevys. It's not even universal for one kind of cylinder head or one kind of intake manifold or anything like that. You need to test it on the combination that you have to know if it makes any power. And, quite honestly, if it made five horsepower or whatever, you probably wouldn't ever see that at the track. So it'd be a lot of money to spend. Going from a stock stamp steel rocker to a roller rocker with a different ratio probably is going to show a gain. But yeah, I don't know why they wouldn't do both. But on a small block Chevy, you're going from a 1.5. So the normal thing is to go to 1.6s on both of them. Normally on a Ford, you go from a 1.6 to a 1.7. If your intercooler has both inlet and outlet on the same side, does it work as well as the one with the inlet on one side and outlet on the other? I would think that the flow rate would be reduced if you do it that way. If you do an in, it's got to make a turn in the end of the other end tank, and then come back and go back out. And also, I think your you're only using half of the core, and then it's already heated. So it probably would not be as efficient like that. As a universal thing. The question is always is, does it matter? Is it already working good enough to work? And making it better, you're not going to see that much. It would depend. Richard, have you talked about BTR where the trunnion bolts are more stable at higher RPM? They've been testing them on the Spintron ARP versus GM versus BTR. I haven't talked to Brian about that. We normally get together and talk about stuff that they're testing on the Spintron because I'm interested in that stuff. But I haven't seen that. It wouldn't surprise me if they found some sort of metallurgy or something that it would be better. They found a lot of interesting things that they didn't think that was going to make a difference. A lot of it did. It's got my battery for my laptop to tune on the fly. Nice. Let's see. John, what's up? It's been a long time since I've been able to make a live feed. Excellent. Good to have you here. I'd like to modify my 08 Silverado to run with the TRX, which is a 12.3 quarter mile car. Is it possible to adjust a supercharger? What does it run right now? Have you taken it to the track so that you know what your what your differential is? If yours runs a 1730, that's a pretty big hill to climb. If it runs a 1270, that's not that big a hill. I was wondering if the air just made a U-turn and not go through the cooling fins. No, it has to go through the cooling fins because it's essentially it's a dual pass core. So it goes to the end and then makes a turn and then comes back. The thing that I don't like, or the thing that I want to change, and because this is how the water cooling is on the dual core air to water core that I use from CX Racing, is it goes in and comes out on the same side, and I don't want to do that. And I think that the tubing that we use and the fittings that are on there are not big enough anyway. I want to use just, in this case, we'll have to use 2 on each side, but 2 really big ones, and then put 2 big ones on the other side, and then have it just go in and come out the other side. And that way we can get, maximum coolness. Could injector placement and air velocity cause the air to push fuel out of the intake rather than into the intake? It's not that, because you can also get fuel standoff with the injector placement down at the port. You do get fuel standoff. You just don't see it inside the manifold, but that is happening. And depending on the runner length would also determine whether or not it's going to come out. For a centrifugal blower, you need the right converter that gets it in the RPM range where you hit the throttle. Mine flashes to 5,000. Yeah, 5,000 to 6,500 or 7,000 would be a much better thing than doing it from 3,000. New kids will make you forget what day it is. Both the puppies and things. Yep. Yeah, they're awesome. What's the matter, Milo? Do you want to go out and see somebody out there? It's just Owen. He's fine. And then I'm pulling engine. Okay, you're going to pull it out, Todd? Yeah, there's a plate that runs the length of the middle of it. Yeah, Burns, if you have some that don't, that's much, much worse. 6-liter LQ4 is 28 PSI. A back pressure, okay, if it's 16 pounds of intake pressure. Yeah, that's fine. It's less than 2 to 1. Would the farther the injector is located from the intake valve would give greater time for the fuel to atomize? That's not what we're doing to make power. what we're doing is, because if you take a look at that, almost every injector is down at the head, and so it's close to the valve. And in the case of direct injection, it's actually in the port. I mean, it's actually in the chamber. So, and they use really high pressure to atomize it, but they're also using really high pressure because when they're injecting it, it's fairly high pressure in the combustion chamber. So they have to overcome that. But I don't think it's an atomization thing. The atomization is usually done when you spray it from the injector. But what we're doing, and the reason that we're getting power from that injector placement, is that we're cooling the charge air. Where do you find the engine information when measuring bore and taper? Trying to figure out how much tolerance the 2225 is allowed. Everything's within 1 thou. You should be able to look up the factory specs on that. Does somebody have an assembly manual for that motor? Let's see. I'd say it runs 1490s at the moment. Okay, so you got to knock off 2 seconds. That's a little bit for a supercharger to knock off. It's not insurmountable, but nothing that a 75 shot can't cure. Yeah, the Ben from the car farm might know what the tolerances are, but you'd need some sort of factory service manual to tell you what the acceptable taper is. Probably not very much. Brian, you're still waiting to hear back from BTR? Oh my gosh. Sometimes I just can't even. Is there a cooling loss turning an intercooler sideways instead of horizontal? The air, the boosted air is going to flow through it the same. Are you talking about the amount of airflow? The airflow that you would get, is it an air to air intercooler? And are you talking about the amount of air that goes through the core? If you don't have it directly in the airstream roll, the air is coming in like this. If you do it like this, and this is what you're talking about, you have to duct something up to get the airflow to go through it. It can't just sit there. I mean, it will do that. It just won't work as well. Richard, take a peek at the latest BTR YouTube. He's talking about the same topic you were on, the lobe stability. It's a critical thing. I mean, what's one of the best fuel injection types in your opinion? There isn't a best one. They all do different things for different things. For a turbo application, have you found the limit of the stock LS6 intake? I don't know what you mean by the limit of it. What cubic inch would you say is too big for it? It depends on what you're trying to do with it. I mean, it will still flow air even up to 900 cubic inches. It's just not going to work as well because it doesn't have the airflow to do that. And it's not going to have typically what would happen is on a 408, it wouldn't have the airflow range. I mean, it wouldn't have the RPM range that most guys would want with that displacement. And we've talked about this a lot, and I'm doing a story for it right now. In fact, if you take a look at a fast intake versus a truck intake or versus an LS6 intake, it's a little bit better than a truck intake manifold. But if you take a look at that versus like a fast, especially on a cathedral port deal, the fast is a lot better and will be even more betterer on a 408 stroker, because the more power you're asking it to make, the more restrictive the factory style intakes are going to be, and the better the fast is going to look. So if you test it on a stock 4.8, you're not going to get that much of a gain. But if you test it on the kind of thing that you're talking about, it could be 25 or 30 horsepower. Oh, I'm in. What am I doing in top chat, guys? Come on, man. What's up? Just all the silliness. Let's see here. Oh, Joan, I didn't even read about your turbo application. That would change things. That would help. I mean, you can make 1,500 horsepower with that intake manifold if you wanted to do that. Anyone here do 4-cylinder front-wheel drive drag racing? Trying to figure out where to start launch RPM. You just have to practice. You have to go out and do launches, and then it will change with different tracks because your grip will change. You should, if you're trying to check thrust, you should be able to feel it. Brule and I do that on the builds and stuff. And we try to, you got it when you're putting it together and stuff. We hit it with a mallet and a drift on both sides, and then get it kind of seated in, and then we move it back and forth like with screwdrivers, usually on the counterweights, and we move it back and forth and go, that's 4.5 thousandths, and then we measure it to see how much it actually is, to see how sharp or not so sharp we really are. But the thing is, after you've done like 10 of them, you'll be within a thousandths easily. It's like looking at ring gap. That's 22. So I have a 214, 222, 112 in my Hemi. I'm looking to make some modest gains with a little reduction in low speed torque as possible. Can anyone comment if this is a good choice? That compared to the stock cam? So, Todd, you should or clarify the fact that you're talking about cranking compression, right? So it has 200 pounds or 210 pounds or whatever, 20, whatever the number was of cranking compression is what you're talking about, right? Hey, forget about it, or what? Fudge it? Oh, fudge it. Yeah. No, we want all the questions, so there's no bad questions. Let's see. Richard, would you ever run a turbo on a GMTBI? I don't know. The thing that I'd be worried about running a turbo on it is I don't know how you get enough fuel from the TBI. It's certainly not a stock one. What are you doing, Milo? Richard, I did David's formula, and with 110 LSA cam, I should be on a 246 intake duration for your 383. I'm at 242, so I guess I'm not too far off. Okay. Is it that's a lot of duration for it's not a street car, right? .392 Hemi. Some people say you can't use it with boost because boost stops. What is stops flap moving? I don't know. Oh, it stops it because it has a dual runner intake. Is that what you're saying? It might if I don't know how the actuator is done on that intake manifold. If the actuator is done at well, it can't be, but it could be a vacuum pod to hold it closed. But my guess is it's going to have some sort of solenoid. So I don't know how they're doing it. If it's electronic, then you don't have to worry about it, unless they're using vacuum diaphragm. Dr. Viren today, like I guess the turbo TBS needs a 3800 to 4000 stall converter to light the turbo off when staging. Yeah. You mean you want it to be working right? Should a daily truck engine be balanced before or during a rebuild? Well, I don't know what you're starting out with. Is the thing already balanced? Stock 6.1 cam is a 206 211 and a 117. That's not a big cam. Take a look up at the channel. I ran a bunch of I've run cam tests on the Hemi. Building a 6-liter for a buddy. He's not sure 862s will work on it. Could you give me some help? Yeah, just ask away. Just let me know what he's trying to do. The 862 head will bolt on there, and it will make more low speed power if he's trying to do a torque kind of thing for towing. It does raise the compression though, so you have to be sure that the tune is right and stuff. Do me a favor. So now, James, you got me singing the song. How much drivetrain loss do you typically see with a chassis dyno? I made 502 wheel horsepower on my 5.3 with a BTR stage 1 turbo cam and a 7875 at 11 pounds through a 4L80 and a Ford 9. That's the problem, is that you don't know what it is because you don't know how much your combination takes away. You don't know how much the 9-inch is worth. You don't know how much that cam or that transmission's worth. You don't know how much that converter is worth, what the tire size that you have. You don't know the way that the engine was run on the engine dyno. There's just not a number. Just pick one and multiply it and get what you want. Plan to run the Phytech 1200 horsepower power adder with the GT82s driven from a Forge 383. I believe you talked about not having too large of a cam. 284, 296. If you're doing a turbo, I would pick. I probably would pick a smaller cam than that. It's like singing "It's a Small World" every time you go see Disneyland. You need to go out, Milo? Hang on, guys. Watch out, Milo. You need to go out? Hey, Owen. Are you down there? Go get him. Go get him. Can you let Milo out? Go, Milo. Go. How much is too much compression? My Wesker race catalog has a compression ratios from 15 to 18:1 for a 632 with SR20 heads. Is a trade-off at some point. There is definitely a trade-off. The gain that you get going from 10-1 to 11-1, 11-1 to 12-1 is pretty good. The gain that you get from going 17-1 to 18-1 is probably next to nothing. Would I need Forge internals to make an LS1 reliable at 600 wheel horsepower? No. Nope. You're good. You just need ring gap. Especially if you're using E85. A 392 variable intake is electronic. That's why I was thinking that even with a small electronic motor could easily win boost flows. Yeah, I honestly don't think it's going to be I need to look and see what it's actually doing in there, but I don't think that that's going to be a problem with boost. Sam, the only video I saw was running HRT. No, we ran some other comp cams too. The 260 and the 273, I think. What were those Hemi cams? I know one of them. I know the small one was a 260. And the other one was a 270 something. The other 260, 268, and 273, I think, is what comes to mind. I'm sure that's what it was. Because I remember Dulcich also did that test. The 260 I liked. I think that that's kind of the one that I would pick like for a street car. But a 5.7. Chrysler 2.2, 2.5. Why are they all single pattern? Come on, guys. Richard on Ellis, if the thrust bearing goes bad, could it move the reluctor away from the crank sensor? Man, I would think that it'd have to be a lot for the reluctor to move forward or backward enough so that it didn't line up anymore. I need to look and see where the intersection is for because the wheel, and I don't know if it's a 58 or a 24, but both of those are fairly thick. And I don't know how much off the edge it would have to be from the center of because if you look at that sensor, I don't know. I know what the plastic piece is, but I don't know how big the conductor is in the center. I don't know how big that piece is. LS1 versus an LM7 block to build for boost. I have both sitting in the garage and debating on which one to build for a backup engine. The LM7 will definitely take more. The block will definitely take more power if that's what you're trying to do. If you're trying to do 600 or 700 horsepower, then it doesn't matter. I would pick the aluminum one just because it's going to be lighter. Explorer 5-liter GT40 heads. Will a 1.7 rocker on the exhaust help uncripple the small port? I don't think you're going to cure bad port flow with a 1.7 rocker. I think the gain that you would get from a rocker versus doing a cam is going to be minimal. And the only way for me to know is to test exactly on that combination, because the head is not going to be the only thing that dictates whether or not you get a gain. It's also going to be the intake manifold that you're using, the headers or stock exhaust and stock exhaust manifolds and cats and stock exhaust. All of that stuff is going to help dictate what kind of gain you might get from just a rocker swap. Have a welded diff. Have done some 7,000 RPM drops for burnout fun. Only broke a trans mount. Does exhaust scavenging help fill cylinders with small overlap camshafts? Exhaust scavenging helps fill cylinders with any camshaft. That's why headers work. That's how they work. Is going to a 102 millimeter intake on an LQ4 with flat tops and a 243 head shaved down 20 thousandths, a 231 cam. Going to make that much difference over stock. Going to 102 millimeter fast intake manifold over a stock truck intake manifold will definitely be worth power on that application. Going to Joe Schmo's 102 millimeter intake manifold, the 102 millimeter part of it, like the opening size, is not the thing you're looking for. You're looking for the intake design. That's the thing that's going to make power, not the fact that it could have a 500 millimeter throttle body on it. But the intake manifold is ultimately going to do it. It's going to decide what the power curve is. Take a look at the intake manifold, the big intake manifold shootout that I did on cathedral ports. We did it on a 6-liter with a cam, kind of like that. This one had more exhaust duration because I'd want it to be more split than that. But on a 111, that's going to make power. And you can look and see what all the intakes did. $8V, you want carbon fiber rings to be a thing? James, I already did a video on the M90 on the 4.8 and it didn't work. The blower was too small. I was spinning it with a stock pulley. But I need to do 2 of them or spin it faster. I don't think even spinning it faster is going to do very much. Yeah, Sergeant, you don't need to do an internal balance. If the thing is already externally balanced, which a lot of small blocks are, just run it. If it's already been balanced, don't worry about having to do an internal balance. That's not going to gain you anything. Overlap and turbos too. Yeah, you can run lots of cams with overlap with turbos. Fudge it. Hey man, we're all happy to help. There's a lot of good guys here that are smart, that know lots of stuff about lots of things. That's why I come here and hang out. I'm putting another set of GT40Ps on my Explorer, but didn't want to go deeper and change the cam and the springs and the lifters, etc. No, I get it. I get it. It's just that what I'm saying is don't expect too much from doing that. It's not going to be like putting a camshaft in it. And I don't think I would spend the money on it. Uh-oh, James is going to be making some sparks. Infamous Nova, you should ask your question here. That's why we're all here. Because if I can't answer it, then one of these are like really sharp guys can. Have you ever done tests on trick parts like David showed off, carbon valves? They've tried to run, in fact, I think it was David that tried to run them at West Tech. Carbon fiber valves didn't work. They immediately flew into a million pieces and blew out the exhaust. Titanium pistons I haven't seen, not that I know of. James, you got to do a search for the do a search for I don't know what it is, junkyard supercharger or something like that. Let's see. Or M90 supercharger. So search across your channel, M90. Show all. So there's 9 of them up there that have something to do with M90s. Yes. How to cheap junkyard M90 blower. It shows up when you do a search. Just like you're supposed to. It only has 19,000 views. I'm never doing that again. Shirley, you jest. I don't. And don't call me Shirley. Is 600 horsepower and 6.2 with non-ported 821 heads, good cam and intake possible without a major loss down low? No, not without a major loss down low. It's going to take a 600 horsepower and a 6.2 takes a big camshaft. And with a stock head, you have to have an intake manifold that's going to sacrifice power down low. And the intake that I would run is I would not worry about making 600 horsepower. I'd put an LS3 intake manifold on and just do a cammed one. Let's see. More of a street strip build. What intake would you run on a street strip build? Oh, I think I answered that. Camaro LT1, that's not an accurate statement. Answer may not be correct, but it will be an answer. we will make up for it in volume. So any information on the blueprint 4-cylinder? I don't think that that's the real deal yet. Need more factory 2-barrel V8 intake manifold testing and porting. Do you think the Trick Flow 225 over the 243 heads milled down are worth the money? A 225 head is going to flow 50 CFM more than a stock 243 head that's been milled down. It has the potential to make a lot more power. But what you're asking it to do depends on, or how much power it gives you, is going to depend on the thing that you're testing it on. Let's see. What power level do you switch magnets and blowers? Well, you should just start with the 2650, right? And just then you don't have to worry about it. Will 2.5 grams per ARP bolt heavier than stock be too much? So you had it balanced and then you change the bolts? You should ask your machinist if it's going to change it. Give him one rod and see what it does to the totals. He may tell you it's not going to change very much at all. Yeah, the comp 260 cam was fairly small. Never seen so many. James, I am going to do another one, but the live feed was just about. The question was the poll question was, should you or should I do a twin setup? And lots of people said no. I was very disappointed. I was very disappointed in my family. Tom, the M90 that I'm using is, and either one of them will bolt on for what I'm doing, but a Gen 5 M90 from a 3800. I'm ready to cut a cylinder off an LS head and stick it on my lawnmower. There you go. Well, which turbos for 1400 to the tire? You might be able to get away with GT45s on that, but I think that those might be a little small for a 572. I think I would just do 78, 75 VS Racing turbos on it. Adrian, what was wrong with the M90? Why did you have to have it rebuilt? %, E85 and 50% 93. Any reason this is a good choice? That's fine. It's cheaper E85 or it's probably not cheaper. Do you have a hard time finding E85 or something? I don't know why you wouldn't just put E85 in if you have access to E85. Let's see. Would you leave the stock regulator and fuel rails on LS3 intake manifold? Yeah, you can make 1,000 horsepower with that stuff, so I wouldn't worry about it. Let's see. Super Coupe did your Super Coupe did have an M90 on it. It was very similar. It just because it was an offset mount deal, it just mounted differently. Old school 78, 75, good for towing with a 5.3 truck or a GT45. I think I would use a GT45 on a 5.3. I don't think you're gonna if you already have one, try it and see how responsive it is. It's a little on the big side for like a 7 pound 5.3. Russ, if you had the choice of doing a trick flow top end on an already healthy 454, it's already making 500 horse. It's making 500 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds, or a low boost blow through torque storm with no intercooler. So you're gonna blow through a carburetor, right? So if it's low boost and you're blowing through a carburetor, you might be able to get away with that. Although I always recommend an intercooler. I'm thinking you're gonna pick up more from the blower. John, your L92 intake is not going to limit you. The only thing that's going to limit the only possible limitation that intake would have is RPM. I don't know what kind of RPM you're running on that thing, but it's not going to limit flow. You can max out those turbos with that combination. Let's see. Anybody tried comps oil, the oil waterless turbos? Yeah, I have tried those, but the ones that we tried didn't work. But that was way back when they first started. Maybe they're better now. Let's see. One more minute. I'm going to close out our poll at 81% saying that it will hurt the airflow. CP, if you wanted to take advantage of a 342 gear ratio, how would you design your engine build? I don't. So we're trying to do an engine based on a gear ratio? I don't know how I would go about that. There's a lot of stuff that I would need to know for that. Is the GT45 too big for a 3.4 liter? It depends on what you have to. You choose the turbo for your desired power output. So how much power do you want to make? Do you want to make 700 or 800 horsepower out of that 3.4 liter? Because that's what that turbo can do. And if you don't want to make that much, you'd be better off going to a smaller turbo for 500 or 600 horsepower and also getting extra boost response. My Phytech 1200 power adder says to subtract 30% on E85. The reason it's doing that is because it takes a lot more fuel to supply that. But by you putting 93 in there instead of the E85, you're also limiting the amount of timing and stuff that you can run with it. Chris, what's up from Australia? CP, you just need to tell us what car it is and what you're trying to do with it. I got a plan. Two M90s and bolt to my intercooler that you have. Do you want me to send you the M90s, Tom? I made a plate for one that bolts onto the high ram, but that's really just a starting point for what I would want to do. I just want to put them and like TP them together so that they're at an angle and then underneath them will be the plate that mounts to the whole TP assembly, the triangle, the blower triangle. We have to call it the Bermuda Triangle, right? The Bermuda Triangle of boost has to be the new name. So we'll bolt that on to the high ram or low ram or whatever kind of ram we want to do it on. But if you want to weld that together, that would be awesome. I'll send you the blowers if you're offering. If not, I'll get it done. Nothing new on the 396. The Bermuda Triangle. That's perfect. Points for Russ. What RPM do you see on a 5.3 with a GT45? The turbos doesn't care about the RPM. The RPM is going to be a function of what you do to the motor. That's going to be your cam and intake manifold, cylinder head to some extent, but mostly the intake manifold and the camshaft. What's stock turbo on a Volvo S70 capable of? I don't know. I don't know that much about the turbos on those. I wonder how the supercharger would affect the long runners, if the rotors would become a variable runner length. I don't know what you're talking about there. Are you talking about the Hemi intake manifold? The dual runner Hemi intake manifold is going to work exactly like it does NA. You're just going to have more power. It's just going to be boosted. It'll do exactly the same thing. The crossover will be the same. It'll have more low speed power with the long runner. It'll have more high speed power with the short one, and all that will work out just fine under boost. James, if you have an on 3 7875, that's probably very similar. A 96 AR, that's probably fine. If you can send the blowers, I will. I'll send them out. I'll send you 2 Gen 5 blowers then. And then we'll also have a little bit of wiggle room. All they need to do is line up with the truck damper. And then as long as they line up with that, and we would even have a little bit of wiggle room with the pulleys, because we could put spacers or whatever behind them if we need to. But you've done this before, so you could get them all lined up. John, your L92 will limit you. If you want to run to 7,500, that will limit RPM. It's not going to limit flow. It's just going to it's not going to want to make power at 7,500. The way that you can get it to make power at 7,500 is if you have a rising boost curve, and your 228 cam is not making power at 7,500. Neither is your intake manifold. So if you're taking it to 7,500, you're forcing it to do that. And the only way it's going to make power up there is if you have a rising boost curve. And on that note, it is time to go. I'm already late. I'm late for a very important date. James, see? Is it better to run more injector than you needed? Yes, always run more, because you can always, it's just like having more throttle. You can always come back off the throttle. It's very, very easy. And I will see you guys all in the morning.